As an adoptee, we didn't have a choice in the whole situation. We don't have a choice. We don't know what we're going to become or who we're going to be. We just know that we're wake up one day and there's people around us, and maybe we don't feel as comfortable with them as we'd like to feel, but they're taking care of us and caring for us and everything else. But that DNA that sparks in the back of our head, that gives us our strengths and our talent and some of our characteristics even, is going to have an impact. Thinking about my story and the fact that my father, biological father, was not a faith-oriented person when I was conceived, but he ended up in the church and becoming a pastor and all these things. Well, when I was he was a well-known resource in the community, and all the pastors used to come to him to ask him what to say or how does this work, or he's a resource to the community. And so I didn't find out about any of this stuff until 2017, which I was hoping to go through a reunion, but I was afraid. I thought it wasn't enough. I didn't deserve it, that kind of mindset. And so when I found out about him, it was kind of like a light went off inside of me, and I realized, no wonder I'm always thinking faith-oriented stuff. No wonder that's important to me.
Adoption is a beautiful thing, but let's be real, it is also complicated. Too often we focus on the adoptive parents, but what about the adoptees themselves? What happens when love or love alone isn't enough? Today's guest, Sharon, Ms. Butler-Obazee, is I say correct?
Yes, you did. 2 points.
Cool. So today's guest, Sharon, is here to challenge the way we think about adoption, parenting, and really to support adoptees that actually need the assistance. Sharon, welcome to the Hart and Hustle Podcast. If I was to just say, Sharon, I meet you at a coffee shop, I always love this question. I say, Sharon, what are you most excited about in life when it comes to what you do? What does that actually sound like?
Oh gosh, what I'm most excited about, family first, of course, but actually what I'm doing now and the person I become after so much trial and error, throughout life and learning and everything else, I feel like the position I'm in right now is really exciting because we're blazing a new trail by introducing a course to help people who want to coach adoptees, or the adoption triad, I should say. We're training them. So we're training, and we've been certified now by ICF, the International Coaching Federation. And so we're accredited now. We're offering continued education, and I never dreamed I'd ever get to this position or have this opportunity before me.
And you could have done anything in life, right? And you're in this space. Why did you choose adoption coaching? Like, why is this your mission?
Oh my goodness. Well, as you mentioned in the beginning, I'm an adoptee. And so living the experience I had as a child, going through the trauma and trying to determine exactly who I am, knowing my identity and trying to figure out what does my culture look like, what is my heritage. And those are questions that every single child, I believe, that's adopted has in the back of their mind, whether they can formally state it or not. It's kind of like a feeling that, they're in the wrong place. So I went through all the mishaps and good things that happened, and basically got positioned after working corporately into this arena. I became certified as a coach, and then what made better sense in the world than to be an adoption coach, because I've lived that life and done that journey.
I love it. What was the hardest part? I mean, and we also talked briefly before this podcast, and I also told you that I was adopted. And yes, we all go through so many similar experiences. And a lot of times we feel like we're alone in it. And so I love that I'm on this conversation, because there's not too many times that I speak to another adoptee that is just so passionate about what they do, and they're giving back in that space, right? So I ask you, while you were adopted, it comes with some hard challenges. What was the hardest part of your journey for you?
I think realizing that I was enough. Just knowing that I was enough, and it was okay, and it was okay for me to be who I am and try and learn more about myself. because somehow in the process of being adopted, we lose ourselves. I mean, I lost myself. I don't know about you, but I had that
Mhm.
experience. And, looking in the mirror at 16 years of age and saying, who is this? Who am I? Where do I belong? And why did I come to this point in life? And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? So, you have all these questions and no answers. So, uh, then you're relying on the world, the parents that raised you, the environment you're in, the systems you're living in, to tell you and identify you as a person. And so I allowed that all to happen without realizing that I had my strengths, I had my journey, I had my desires and wishes and things I wanted to do myself. So just realizing that I was enough and I deserved the information and about my heritage and everything else that I finally got later, and that it was okay. It's all okay.
It is. It truly is, and that we were truly blessed. I think we were one of a kind. I always say I'm so thankful of the second chance I had in life because I could have been adopted by anybody,
Oh,
and just to
yes.
think of how grateful I am. Not everyone has the opportunity to be adopted, so that's where the biggest blessing for me is that maybe I didn't have a family, and I'm not saying that it's perfect, and I'm pretty sure maybe you can attest to it, Sharon. But not saying that it is perfect, but it does create something within us, and I think that's where the leadership skills come in us, and that grit comes from us, right? The confidence at times. As much as we think we lack confidence, I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes I lack confidence. But in reality, we lack confidence because of all these deep rooted issues. And until you,
Right.
as you mentioned, find yourself in this space, it becomes a little hard. When you spent 30 years in corporate America before pivoting into the coaching space, what made you actually take that leap? Was it that mindset shift to say, "Hey, I know my worth. I want to do more, and I want to give back into the space"? How did it actually look like when you took that leap?
Right. Well, when I worked in corporate America, I was giving to a system, of workers' compensation. I worked in that environment with a medical
Mm,
team, and we, sought out solutions for people that had been injured at work. And I always felt like my little tiny part in that whole, my cog in that wheel, was supporting people and helping people through a process that of recovery, and reestablishing themselves. And so, that kind of gave me the sense of, commitment to and challenge to be there for other people. So after I had done that for a while and it was time for me to move on to something else, I wanted to dig deeper, and really challenge myself to do something, that I didn't think I had the capability to do. So that's why I got the certification as a life coach,
mhm.
because helping the system, getting that done, and being successful at it was good. But what about my sisters and brothers and relatives and other crib mates? I call them adoptees, that that I need to help out. How can I be a solution for them too? And in the meanwhile, help myself. I don't know if you ever heard about, or thought about the fact that when people actually get a chance to write a book, you're writing a book, and actually it's a cathartic experience. You live through it and you recover from it and you cry through it and you go through all these things. And I kind of had to get over that hump, that internal barrier that was holding
Mhm.
me into a um, kind of like a hard stone or something. And I couldn't find a way to bring myself away from that, so,
Mhm.
I decided that maybe this was something that I could help clarify some of the challenges I encountered and give me the insight I needed to become whole.
I love it. I love that you're sharing this, and I really want to also kind of talk about that. You're not just the coach for the adoptees, which is what you kind of really wanted to do directly, but then you realize that the bigger impact was actually in coaching the parents.
Right.
What changed that perspective?
Yeah, I started initially as a coach, a life coach, and thinking, oh, I'm going to help all these adoptees and they're just going to be wonderful and my experience is going to be grand. And as I started talking to people and realizing the trauma that had influenced them, the loss they were experiencing, the disconnect that they had between who they were and who they wanted to become,
Hmm.
I recognized that basically it's important to encourage them and give them the value and the information that they had locked inside them. I'm trying to bring that out, but some of their issues were um, deeper, deeper than a coach is capable of going to. And so I ended up recommending therapists to people. We get through maybe 1 or 2 sessions, and I would say, hey, this is a pretty deep situation. Maybe we need to get you over to a therapist. And so I'd have a couple of therapists I work with, and I would make the referral to them. And so the reality set in that, these these people who had been children at some point in time, were in a home with a parent who guided them and tried to help them and thought that I can love them through everything that they potentially might need, who maybe might have been misguided. And maybe, they didn't have all the information they needed. Maybe there was aspects of trauma that they didn't associate with or understand. And maybe they didn't allow the child to interact with their birth family. And, there's so many things that can occur through the process of development that a child, especially adopted child, needs. And so my determination to still work in the community and support the triad refocused onto the parent and realizing that, that is where the rubber hits the road. If I can help a parent to understand how to access the mindset of the adoptee, then I could probably influence and help the adoptee indirectly.
I do agree. I do agree at that parent level. And very similar to you, I started a nonprofit, and my goal was to work with young adults. But then I realized how important it was to really talk to the parents, because no matter how much you're actually pouring into these young kids, in reality, they go home and something else is being poured into them, or something else, they're being taught a different way. But if we can get into those homes, especially of those that are adoptive parents, and they get to hear it from a perspective of an adoptee like myself or you, it becomes a little bit different, because we actually get to put our trauma out there, our experiences, and be very transparent. Because listen, we're not kids anymore. We understand now that we're adults and we got to do what we got to do. And sometimes even still suffer in silence. I actually just recently, I'm still trying to figure this one out, by the way, Sharon. Maybe you can help me here. So I was listening to someone the other day, another leader, and she's in a space of drugs and alcohol. She's recovering after she's now sober 14 years. And so she created this because of her own experiences, right? And I asked her, what was that thing that really keeps you motivated, that keeps you driven through hard times? And she said, my daughter. And when she gives me a hug and kiss and says it's going to be okay. And I don't know what hit me right there, Sharon. I don't have a relationship with my mom, but I know she's into drugs. I know that it's still something. I know that's why I was taken away.
Okay.
And I didn't know that I even felt that way. And I started to get emotional. And to this day, I'm asking, like, man, is there something deep rooted that I don't even know? Because sometimes it's so easy to sweep things under the rug and not bring it to light. As a parent myself, we talk about speaking to parents. As a parent myself, sometimes I need to have these conversations, because what happens, it would actually come out at some point, maybe through anger, maybe through whatever that may look like for people.
Right.
So I kind of love that you're in this space of, let's speak to these adults, let's speak to the parents so they can actually be aware of what's really going on, especially from those directly that have been impacted, such as myself and you, that had to go through those systems and changes and things like that.
Right.
Well, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that adoptive parents actually have about raising an adopted child?
It's interesting, as you were talking about, the relationship with your parent and why you're, placed in a different environment, a safer environment, and what happened through that transition and how it's influencing you now. I think one of the things that parents don't realize is the person that they're adopting has a epigenetic background. There's a DNA that is influencing them in their behavior and their characteristics and their strengths and their knowledge. And so they're thinking that I got this little baby and it's going to be beautiful and I'm going to encourage it and raise it to be a successful adult because of my influence. They're going to be able to leave behind whatever negative things that might be influencing them, and the grief and the loss and the trauma and all that they might be experiencing. I'm going to ignore that because I'm just going to go ahead and raise this child, and it's going to be a beautiful experience for both of us. So, with that DNA and the markers we come forward with, good or bad, it's a part of us, and it's inherent in our psyche, and we're going to become the people that we were supposed to become, and the ability of the parent to provide us a safe environment so we can flourish is a plus. that's a plus. I mean, hands out and salutes to all the parents that take on adoption, because that is a trial and error thing, and they're
Wow.
going to be challenged. It's complex, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
challenges in it.
I
So
agree,
then
man.
I think my parents, everybody's parents, regardless adoption or biological, my hat's off, and I'm a parent too, so I can kind of relate to some of this. But
Hmm.
at the same time, the complexities and everything else that come with adoption make it a little bit more difficult. And as an adoptee, we didn't have a choice in the whole situation. We don't have a choice. We don't know what we're going to become or who we're going to be. We just know
True.
that we're wake up one day and there's people around us, and maybe we don't feel as comfortable with them as we'd like to feel, but they're taking care of us and caring for us and everything else. But that DNA that sparks in the back of our head, that gives us our strengths and our talent and some of our characteristics even,
True.
is going to have an impact. Thinking about my story and the fact that my father, biological father, um, was not a faith oriented person when I was conceived, but he ended up in the church and becoming a pastor and all these things. Well, when
Wow.
I was a kid, he was a well known resource in the community, and all the pastors used to come to him to ask him what to say or how does this work, or he's a resource to the community. And so I didn't find out about any of this stuff until 2017, which, I didn't, I was hoping to go through a reunion, but I was afraid. I thought it wasn't enough. I didn't deserve it, that kind of mindset. And so when I found out about him, it was kind of like a light went off inside of me. And I realized, no wonder I'm always thinking faith oriented stuff. No wonder that's important to me. And so, certain things that we have as individuals, and the characteristics we have received from our parents, it moves on. And I think adoptive parents need to recognize and understand that, this, I call it the nature that someone comes forward with, is a part of them, and it's not going to change. Even though you might influence a child and give it safety and everything, they still have their own inherent characteristics that they live with. And so the adoptive parent is really called to nurture the nature that person is born with. You're born with characteristics and things that you think are important, and if the adoptive parent can see through to
Hmm.
nurture that and try and help you succeed at who you are, rather than to put you in a different mold and put you somewhere where you're uncomfortable and all those things. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
You did.
anyway.
I'm truly just excited to be a part of this conversation with you because I'm actually starting to think like, did I ever have a conversation with someone that was adopted like this on this platform where we're able to showcase it? And I don't think I have, and maybe I have, and they just haven't been so open. I love when I get to find someone that is so open in this space and really. I learn it from them as much as, maybe they learn from me. I don't know. Hope that there is something that
Oh
you
yeah,
take away from here. But I
absolutely.
also want to kind of talk about, because I think there's a gap when it comes to adoption education. How does your program actually fill those gaps? And why is there such a big gap in adoption education?
I just think that there's lack of knowledge. Now, I was actually born in the closed adoption era, so I didn't have a chance to know my biological parents, and it's finally beginning to open up, and people are beginning to recognize the adoptees are really the experts in all this because they are the one to go through the whole entire process.
Hmm.
And so our
For real.
organization really is helping adopted parents with misconceptions, that that trauma is not as critical as as it really is. They don't realize that the baby in utero is in a process of understanding who their parents are, and
Hmm.
who's a caregiver, who are the people that I'm going to surround myself with once I get out of here. It's subconscious. You don't realize that you're thinking this or even have an idea about it, but that's how you recognize your mom after you're born, because you've been hearing her voice, and you've kind of come accustomed to her moans and groans or whatever she's going through. And so when you come out of the womb, your ears, and you're perked up and waiting to hear that voice, that same voice, and get comfort from the mother who has been having you in your utero. Well, that's separation between, the birthing process and into another person's arms is a trauma for a child. And so the trauma can actually begin in utero if the mother's going through a hard time. It's hard for the baby. And then when the baby is born and given to another person, it's again a difficult situation, and more trauma is layered on top of the first trauma until the parent who is getting the baby thinks, I'm getting this wonderful child and we're going to be able to make it through life and it's going to be great. Well, chronic stress influences and impacts the child through their development years. And so, they're not understanding sometimes the depth of the trauma, and that love is not going to be enough for the child, and that you have to be curious about what is driving this child's psyche, what is actually the problem that they're having at the core, and just really try and work that out. The thing about adoptees is sometimes we don't say things out loud, even though we're feeling them. We just try and keep it to ourselves, and we don't want to hurt our parents, and make them feel bad. So we just run around with these internal feelings to ourselves. And actually, it has a profound short-term and long-term effect on you and the child and their development. And so it's important that adoptive parents understand that, giving care and helping the child to develop through the milestones is important, but there's also a lot of curiosity that they need to bring to the situation, to the table, to try and uncover who this child actually is.
So amazing. You got me here thinking. You got me in my head, Sharon. Let me tell you, I'm over here thinking like, wait a minute. I go back, I was adopted when I was 2 years old. So I'm over here thinking like, damn, that was trauma. When I sit here and think about, that was 2 years, that I
Right.
spent and then stripped away. And then, I seen her maybe once or twice as I was growing up. And, so I can only imagine that there's some there that we got to dig up a little bit. But I want to know how different is coaching from therapies, because I think people may think that they're both the same, but ideally they may be very similar, but they're not the same. Can you kind of talk about what's the difference between coaching and therapy when it comes to helping adoptive families?
Right. Well, therapy is more or less communication to a person who is ill. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why therapists can diagnose. They can diagnose a person and have a conversation. They look into the history of the person and how they got to where they are at the present time, and then
Mm-hmm.
help them formulate goals or strategies to move forward, which is a good thing. But it deals mostly with people who are ill, and maybe have some kind of an issue that may need medication or some other heavier type of skill set than a coach. A coach works with a person to help the person identify who they are as an individual, not through telling them, as a therapist might tell them, you have a diagnosis of A, B, and C. A coach actually allows the person to go through the process of identifying who they are through questions that help them go deeper into their subconscious and feel out realistic ideas that actually fit to help them understand what barriers am I up against. And it's typically working with people who are somewhat healthy. We're not
Mm-hmm.
a doctor. You wouldn't come to us if you were ill or sick and expect us to give you any kind of medication. A therapist, that's what a therapist does. A coach really works with you to, in a proactive way, to help you go deeper into your knowledge base and ask you questions that help you bring out the issues that you might not even thought about. But it's been said, and studies show that if I sit here and told you to go to the grocery store at 12 o'clock, you might not go. But if you said, I'm going to the grocery store at 12 o'clock, you're going.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with people to help them to determine what it is they want from life and help them get there.
I love it. Actually, when I went, I had a session myself, and by the end of it, just the questions that were being asked, and I'm sitting here thinking and I'm answering, I'm like, oh wow, that makes sense. Like, why wasn't I thinking about it? But it takes someone to really ask, that trigger that moment for you to even think that way. It's all about, to me, that's why I say mindset is so important. Like, that mental aspect of just life is crucial. You and I both know that feeling of not fully fitting in? We talked about it just a little bit earlier, but how can parents truly better support their adopted children through identity struggles?
One sometimes they can't provide a complete solution. They can work with the child to find out what their strengths are, what they like to do, what their interests are, how they see themselves, and help them to feel as best as they possibly can about who they are and what they want. But the reality is that birth parents are involved in the whole calculation. So you really have to be open to an open conversation with the birth parent and possibly bringing the birth parent into the scenario so that there's interaction between all parties. That way, the child can understand who they are, their identity, and where they got their nose, and how come they feel like a certain way, and those kinds of things. But you're not in jeopardy of losing your parenting role. You're still going to be the parent, and the child is still going to come and relax in the bed that you've prepared for them to stay in. So, but having the ability to, at that intersection, allowing all the parties to meet together is really going to help the child to improve in their self-analysis and understand that they are important and who they are is important, and it just really helps to boost their confidence. So if adoptive parents are open to an open conversation, I'm not saying that you have to invite them to Thanksgiving dinner, but you should at least be willing to share in correspondence. And as comfortable as the adoptee feels, they should be able to engage with the adoptive parent, with the birth parent. I recently saw a movie by Angela Tucker about her journey to go and find her birth mother and what she went through, and it's produced into this movie. And so as I was looking at it, the thing that I thought was most beautiful is that her adoptive parent wrote the biological parent, every year. But the thing is, it was a close adoption, and the agency was the only place that she could take and drop off these letters. And so every year there was a new letter and a new picture, and a new letter and a new picture. Well, in the process of Angela going through this whole thing to go find her mom, she found her, and at first was rejected by the mother because, she wanted to pretend like this didn't happen. But later on, as she warmed up and became familiar with who Angela was, and they had this great, interaction together, they went to the agency and sat down to the table, and the agency was able to bring out this huge box of all these letters and everything that her adopted mom had been writing every single year. And there was tears all over the place. I was crying in the audience. It was just such a heartwarming situation to see. And, imagine, the benefit to Angela, just seeing all that come to fruition at one time all together. It's like full circle. Here's 360 right there, so having the adoptive parents, having the biological parents involved in the growth of the child is highly significant, and I recommend it, 100%. If there's a situation where the parent is not capable, like maybe drugs or whatever, you don't have to have that parent involved. You can find an auntie, a sister, a brother, a nephew, somebody in the family who isn't, impaired in that way, and then have that person involved.
This is such a good conversation. I actually have another question before we transition to another topic, but there's this idea that adoption is actually just about giving a child a home. However, it truly is much deeper than that, and the conversation allows us to understand that it's much deeper than that. What's one thing you actually wish every adoptive parent knew?
I didn't hear the last part. Every adoptive
No worries.
parent.
What's one thing that you wish every adoptive parent knew?
Oh, every adoptive parent knew that it's going to be a rough ride. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of twists and turns, and their unrealistic expectations are going to set them up for a challenge. It's not going to be the simplest thing, and having another person's child is an awesome thing, and it's going to be a wonderful journey. But at the same time, there's going to be peaks and valleys along the whole process.
And how is your organization currently thinking about AI as a tool to really help support your clients and help your team possibly do more with less? Have you guys implemented anything, technology, AI, or anything like that?
We haven't really. Basically, the closest to AI we have is a virtual assistant. Somebody who can fill in all the blanks and make things look pretty and all that. But AI really doesn't have a role, and with us, and I think the only barrier to that is the fact that we're talking about human beings interacting with other human beings here, and so having that human element involved in the whole process is what the whole process needs. I can't see giving that to a robot and saying, "Could you fix this mother or child or something?" It doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't really realistically make sense to me. So AI is a useful tool, and I think it's going to be beneficial in terms of tracking and finding and following and creating better systems or something. But I don't see it as taking over, any role in
Yeah.
this.
I think one way leaders are really utilizing it is having that AI expert and agent, somebody that could help their clients and community possibly just access the information with trusted
Yeah.
information, of course, because right now I think that's really what skeptical people are more skeptical of is it correct information? Is it safe information? So that's what I've seen a lot of leaders do is just having that implementation, not so much for, because you are right, we still need that people to people aspect. I'm always a big believer, even like this conversation. I can imagine it would be deeper in person because just the energy that we both would have in person to just be so willing. I mean, just to know that we're both adopted in a room together. The
Hmm.
energy's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
where life has brought us. Ideally, statistics show that we weren't supposed to be here, right? We hear that all the time. But
Right.
look where we've made our careers of speaking and helping others. When
Hmm.
at one point in our lives we wanted to be helped, So
Exactly.
now here we are helping. So I truly love it. I love the AI space for those reasons, but I definitely do feel you on that. We don't want to lose that people, because right now with social media and technology, we're almost losing the people stuff, right?
Right. No, well,
So
AI is good for getting the word out. I mean,
yeah,
in terms of telling people who you are and how they can find you and what you do,
yeah.
those kinds of elements of AI are useful. And I can see it being a resource when people aren't sure which information to trust and believe. So AI could be a resource for that too. It could gather books or something and spit out some information that is would take you like a year to read. Maybe they can find some way
Yeah.
to put that all together.
Listen, I'm
And,
telling you, that's what I do, Sharon. I'm not a big reader, and it's actually on my desk. I had this book right here that when I was in the corporate world, my supervisor at the time gave me. And first of all, it's a big book. Okay, Ephraim don't
yeah.
read big books, and it's the success principles, how to get away from where you were at to where you want to be. And when he shared it to me, he's like, "Hey, man, it really changed my life. I'm hoping that it changes yours." And I had it sitting there as I have some other books as there, and I was like, you know what? I really would love to know what the book's about, especially when it's talk about the success principles. When I was in a time where I took that leap of faith myself, and I went to ChatGPT, I said, hey, can you kind of give me what this book's about and give me key points? And it did. It literally broke down every section, and I'm saying like, wow, and I'm doing that, I'm doing that. It was so great to just kind of get in seconds, right? That
Yes.
information.
Yes.
So I do love it. But let's talk about it. We're about to wrap up here. But for anyone listening who's considering adoption or struggling as an adoptive parent, what's your actually the biggest piece of advice that you'll provide?
Um, I would say reach out to a professional, a coach. I mean, basically the struggle is part of the journey, but overcoming the struggle is probably the goal. So if you're trying to be a parent who is knowledgeable and assertive and helpful to the adoptee, reach out to the adoption community. I mean, even if you just join a support group, you know, that's going to help in giving ideas, getting ideas and realistic ideas, methods maybe to, get from point A to point B, because as we realized in the beginning of this conversation, there's commonalities between
Mhm.
parties. So just having that opportunity to talk with somebody else who's going through the same thing you are is going to be beneficial. But of course, I can't help but recommend my profession,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
talking to a coach, because that's going to help really give you the mindset that you need to go forward. And the reality is, especially with our model, we have a trispective interconnectivity model where we're not just taking the consideration of the adoptive parent alone, we're considering actually the birth mother, the adoptive parent, and the adoptee who's at the center of this
Mhm.
whole thing, to help the parent to overcome the situation. I mean, we even coach teenagers that are going through things and help them to overcome, whatever challenge they have before them that's limiting them in life and things.
Love it.
It's helpful to talk to another adoptee about the things you won't even say to your mom or to
Mhm.
your parents.
True.
So um,
True.
we can be a guide for that too.
And how can people connect with you and your organization if they want the coach, they want the resources?
Okay, yeah, we can be found at givefamilyservices.com. We're actually, if I could, at the end of this, maybe give you some material on our coaching course so that
Absolutely.
people could look that up, and see if that's something that they want to participate in, or maybe they've always had the goal of becoming a coach, or maybe they even got coach certification and they're trying to find out their niche. It could be any of those scenarios, or they're a professional. And I've been a professional all this time, but there's never really been any relevant, succinct training on what to do as an adoption coach and what's the criteria and what matters. And so,
I love that. And yeah, if you're watching, we'll definitely have that down in the in the description section. So those that are looking for more information, we'll be able to provide that. And Sharon, we're gonna wrap it up here. This is like the fun
okay,
part that you've been waiting on right here.
I
We get
know.
on and Sharon's like, "What's the blind question?" I'm like, "Sharon, we gotta wait to the end." But if you could sit down with your younger self, the little
Mhm.
girl who's trying to find her place in the world, what's the one thing you would tell her?
um, don't be afraid. You know, take that extra step. You know, you're not. I remember being a kid and looking at a cartoon, and the guy would open the door and he said, "Watch out for the first step because there's a big drop."
Mhm.
So, I kind of like approached life like that. I didn't want to step out of my comfort zone because I was afraid. And so, as a child, I would say, "Don't be afraid," and that would, I think, take all of the binders off that are holding me back. So,
Well, Sharon, has definitely been a pleasure. For you guys that are still watching, make sure that you guys do subscribe. Make sure that you guys do like and share with those individuals that may need to hear this. Two adoptees coming together to really share how you yourself can overcome adversity. And not just because you're adopted, because you're going through something in life. Find those people, as in coaches, that would coach you through what it is that you're trying to overcome. There's so much help, there's so much resources out there that truly it's to help the mind. It's to help the person that is dealing with some of these struggles. My name's Ephraim. This has been Sharon. This has been the Hart and Hustle Podcast. We'll catch you guys on the next episode.